Ignaz Semmelweis. You're walking down a hospital corridor in 1847 Vienna. To your left, a ward where mothers deliver with midwives. 1 in 60 dies of childbed fever. To your right, a ward where doctors deliver babies. 1 in 6 mothers dies, screaming in agony, flesh rotting while still alive. The doctors move between corpse dissections and deliveries without washing their hands. One man notices the pattern. For speaking the truth, they will destroy him. Ignaz Semmelweis, a Hungarian obstetrician, was appointed to Vienna General Hospital's maternity clinic in 1846. Within months, he noticed a horrifying statistical anomaly. The doctor attended first clinic had a maternal mortality rate of 10 to 15%. The midwife attended second clinic had rates of 2 to 3%. In May 1847, Semmelweis instituted mandatory hand washing with chlorinated lime solution in the first clinic. The mortality rate dropped from 18.27% in April to 2.2% by November. The evidence was irrefutable. Hospital records documented a 90% mortality reduction. His colleague Jakub Kolečka died in 1847 after a scalpel cut during autopsy. The symptoms were identical to childbed fever. Semmelweis realized doctors were transferring what he called cadaverous particles from corpses to living patients. He couldn't explain the mechanism. Germ theory didn't exist yet. Robert Koch wouldn't discover bacteria until 1876, 11 years after Semmelweis's death. But the data was undeniable. When doctors washed their hands, mothers lived. When they stopped, mothers died. Vienna's medical director refused to accept the findings. He stated that doctors are gentlemen, and gentlemen's hands are clean. In 1849, Semmelweis was dismissed from Vienna General Hospital without explanation. He returned to Budapest, where he reduced mortality at St. Rochus Hospital to 0.85% by 1860. Still ignored. In 1861, he finally published The Etiology, Concept, and Prophylaxis of Childbed Fever. The medical community rejected it, calling his findings unscientific because he couldn't explain the mechanism in terms of contemporary theory. By 1865, Semmelweis showed signs of mental breakdown. He had spent 18 years watching preventable deaths, while his colleagues actively chose to continue killing. On July 30th, 1865, he was committed to a psychiatric asylum in Vienna, likely tricked by colleagues. He died 13 days later, age 47. The cause of death was sepsis from infected wounds, reportedly sustained after being beaten by asylum guards. The same infection he'd spent his life fighting killed him. Historians say Semmelweis failed to communicate effectively. He was abrasive, didn't publish systematically, couldn't provide a mechanism. The medical establishment wasn't malicious, just scientifically conservative. His mental breakdown was unfortunate but unrelated to professional rejection. But this wasn't poor communication. Semmelweis published data showing 90% mortality reduction. Hospital records were irrefutable. Doctors watched the numbers drop when they washed hands, then rise again when they stopped. They didn't reject him because he lacked evidence. They rejected him because accepting the evidence meant admitting they'd been killing mothers with their own hands for decades. His mental breakdown came after 18 years of watching preventable deaths. The system that rejected germ theory killed him with an infection in an asylum meant to treat mental illness. That's not coincidence. That's poetry written in blood. From a hospital in 1847 Vienna, we leap backward 2,000 years to the ancient Mediterranean. There, another man saw something no one else could see, not in a ward, but in the sky itself. Aristarchus of Samos. Picture the ancient Greek island of Samos, 270 years before Christ. A mathematician named Aristarchus looks up at the night sky and realizes something impossible. The Earth is not the center. The sun is. The stars are distant suns. The universe is vast beyond comprehension. He writes it down. Then history erases him for 1,800 years. Aristarchus of Samos lived from approximately 310 to 230 BCE. He was a mathematician and astronomer. According to Archimedes, the only reason we know about Aristarchus's ideas at all, he proposed that Earth orbits the Sun in circular motion, that Earth rotates on its axis daily, and that the fixed stars are incredibly distant, so distant their parallax is imperceptible to the naked eye. This was heliocentrism, 1,800 years before Copernicus. Archimedes mentioned Aristarchus's heliocentric hypothesis in the Sand Reckoner, written around 250 BCE. He wrote that Aristarchus brought out a book in which he supposes that the fixed stars and the sun remain unmoved, that the earth revolves about the sun. Plutarch later wrote that Cleanthes the Stoic declared Aristarchus should be charged with impiety for putting the hearth of the universe in motion. That charge wasn't trivial. Socrates was executed on similar charges. In a world where Earth's centrality was religious doctrine and common sense, heliocentrism was heresy. Only one work by Aristarchus survives today, on the sizes and distances of the sun and moon. It assumes a geocentric model, suggesting he published his heliocentric idea separately. That book was apparently lost or destroyed. We know of it only through Archimedes' mention. In the surviving work, Aristarchus calculated the sun is 6.75 times more distant than the moon. The modern value is 389 times, but he established that the sun is farther, setting the foundation. He calculated the sun's diameter is 20 times larger than Earth's. The modern value is 109 times. Again, directionally correct. His heliocentric ideas vanished from astronomy for 1,800 years. Hipparchus in 150 BCE and Ptolemy in 150 CE codified the geocentric model instead. No other Greek astronomer adopted heliocentrism. Copernicus published De Revolutionibus in 1543, initially crediting no predecessors. In later editions, Copernicus briefly mentioned Aristarchus, but stated he revived rather than copied the idea. Then Galileo's telescope observations from 1609 to 1610 finally provided observational proof of the heliocentric model. Stellar parallax wasn't actually measured until 1838 by Friedrich Bessel, 2,108 years after Aristarchus. Ancient astronomy lacked instruments to test heliocentrism, scholars say. Without visible stellar parallax, without observed planetary phases, there was no empirical way to prove Earth moved. Occam's razor favored geocentrism. Simpler to assume the thing that looks stationary is stationary. Aristarchus's idea was speculative philosophy, not testable science. It was forgotten because it couldn't be demonstrated. But Aristarchus wasn't just speculating. He calculated. He measured. He used geometry to determine the relative sizes and distances of celestial bodies. The first person in history to do so. His calculations were directionally correct, even if imprecise. The problem wasn't that he lacked evidence. The problem was that his evidence demanded a universe too vast, too empty, too indifferent to human significance. His book didn't survive, not because it was wrong, but because what it implied was terrifying. Someone decided what ideas deserved to persist. For 1,800 years, humanity chose the comfortable lie over uncomfortable truth. From a man erased for seeing Earth's motion, we turn to a man burned alive for seeing the universe itself as infinite. Giordano Bruno. The year is 1600. Rome's Inquisition ties a man to a stake in the Campo de' Fiori. His tongue is nailed through with an iron spike to silence him. As flames consume his body, he's being executed for stating facts. The sun is a star. The stars are distant suns. The universe contains infinite worlds, many with life. 4 centuries later, space telescopes confirm every word. But Giordano Bruno never saw vindication. He only saw fire. Giordano Bruno was born in 1548 in Nola, Italy. He became a Dominican friar, philosopher, and cosmologist. After reading Copernicus's De Revolutionibus, he took heliocentrism further than even Copernicus dared. He argued the universe was infinite, containing countless solar systems, many harboring life. He rejected geocentrism, Earth's cosmic uniqueness, and the notion that the universe revolved around humanity. In 1584, Bruno published On the Infinite Universe and Worlds. So he stated there are countless suns and countless Earths all rotating around their suns. He argued space is infinite, rejecting Aristotelian cosmology of crystalline spheres. He proposed that many worlds harbor intelligent life, a heretical denial of humanity's unique cosmic status. These weren't vague philosophical musings. They were specific cosmological claims that would be proven true 400 years later. Bruno fled Italy in 1576 after being accused of heresy for questioning transubstantiation and immaculate conception. He wandered Europe for 16 years, England, France, Germany, publishing cosmological works that made him increasingly notorious. In 1591, he returned to Venice on the false promise of safety to tutor a nobleman. He was betrayed to the Venetian Inquisition in 1592 and imprisoned. Transferred to the Roman Inquisition in 1593, he was held in a dungeon for 7 years. In February 1600, he was found guilty on multiple charges, including claiming the existence of a plurality of worlds and their eternity. He refused to recant his cosmological views, even under threat of execution. On February 16, 1600, his sentence was pronounced, to be punished as mercifully as possible and without the shedding of blood. This was Inquisition code for burning at the stake. On February 17, 1600, he was executed in Campo dei Fiori. His tongue was nailed through with an iron spike to prevent a final speech. His ashes were thrown into the Tiber River. All his writings were banned by the Catholic Church. In 1838, Friedrich Bessel confirmed stellar parallax, proving stars are at vast distances. In 1992, the first confirmed exoplanet was discovered orbiting pulsar PSRB 1257 plus 12. In 1995, Michel Mayor and Didier Queloz discovered the first exoplanet around a sun-like star, 51 Pegasi b. They won the 2019 Nobel Prize for this work. As of 2024, over 5,600 confirmed exoplanets exist in more than 4,000 planetary systems. Spectroscopy confirmed stars are made of the same elements as the Sun. Bruno was correct about everything. In 2000, the Vatican expressed regret for Bruno's execution, not an apology. Regret. The Church says Bruno was burned for theological heresies, not cosmology. His astronomical ideas were speculative philosophy unsupported by evidence. The Church saw him as a theological threat, not a scientific threat. His execution was religious persecution, not suppression of science. But the charges specifically listed claiming the existence of a plurality of worlds as heresy. The Inquisition understood that infinite worlds meant Earth wasn't special, humanity wasn't cosmically unique, and the Christian salvation drama wasn't the center of existence. Bruno refused to recant his astronomical claims, even when recanting would have saved his life. He died for cosmology. And he was right. The fact that his ashes were thrown in the Tiber, his books burned, his name banned for centuries, suggests the Church understood the threat perfectly. They tried to erase not just the man, but the idea itself. It didn't work. From infinite universe to a finite planet torn apart. From Renaissance Rome to 20th century Greenland, where a man died on ice trying to prove continents move. Alfred Wegener, November 1930. Alfred Wegener is trapped on the Greenland ice sheet, 250 miles from safety. He's 50 years old, suffering from frostbite and exhaustion. He set out on this expedition to prove a theory that's made him the most ridiculed scientist in geology. Continents drift across Earth's surface like rafts. He will die in the ice. 50 years later, plate tectonics will prove he was right all along. They destroyed his career. Nature took his life. Alfred Wegener was born in 1880 in Berlin. He was a meteorologist and geophysicist. On January 6th, 1912, he presented continental drift theory at the Geological Association in Frankfurt. In 1915, he published Die Entstehung der Kontinente und Ozeane, The Origin of Continents and Oceans. His proposal was radical. Continents were once joined in a supercontinent he called Pangaea, which existed 300 million years ago. Since then, they've drifted apart. The evidence was compelling. South American and African coastlines fit together like puzzle pieces. Wegener calculated the probability of this being chance as 1 in 600 million. He identified identical fossil species on separated continents. Mesosaurus, a freshwater reptile, appears in both South America and Africa. Glossopteris, a plant fossil, appears across southern continents. He noted matching rock formations and mountain ranges across continents, now separated by oceans. The data was solid, but Wegener couldn't explain how continents moved. He proposed implausible mechanisms like Earth's rotation and tidal friction. Physicist Harold Jeffreys calculated Earth's mantle was too rigid for continents to plow through. Wegener had no counter. At a 1926 American Association of Petroleum Geologists symposium devoted to refuting Wegener, leading geologist Roland T. Chamberlain stated, "If we are to believe Wegener's hypothesis, we must forget everything which has been learned in the last 70 years. British geologist Philip Lake wrote that a footloose continental drift is a fairy tale. The rejection wasn't just professional, it was personal. Wegener was a meteorologist proposing geological theory, so he was German presenting to American and British societies still hostile after World War I. He was an outsider challenging orthodoxy. In 1929, he led an expedition to Greenland, hoping to rebuild his scientific reputation through weather research. In 1930, he organized a third expedition to rescue stranded researchers at Ijsmede Station in the ice sheet's interior. On November 1st, 1930, Wegener's 50th birthday, he left Ijsmede Station with one companion, Rasmus Willemsen. They trekked 250 miles across the ice toward the coast. Wegener likely died of a heart attack from overexertion on November 2nd or 3rd. His body was discovered May 12th, 1931, carefully buried in ice by Willemsen, whose body was never found. Wegener died professionally rejected, ridiculed as a catastrophist by the geology establishment. In the 1960s, seafloor spreading was discovered by Harry Hess. In 1968, plate tectonics theory unified continental drift with the correct mechanism, mantle convection. Deep-sea cores, paleomagnetism, and seismic data confirmed continents had moved exactly as Wegener described. GPS satellites now measure centimeters per year continental movement. Real-time vindication, 5 decades too late. Wegener was a meteorologist without geological training, scholars say. His proposed mechanisms were physically impossible. Geologists didn't reject him out of malice, but because his mechanism was wrong. When the correct mechanism was discovered, his observations were validated. Rejecting him initially was scientifically justified. But Wegener never claimed to know the mechanism with certainty. He said the Newton of drift theory has not yet appeared. He presented empirical evidence, matching coastlines, fossils, rocks, and asked geologists to explain it. They refused to engage with the evidence because they didn't like his proposed mechanism. That's not science. That's intellectual gatekeeping. He died trying to gather more data in Greenland, still searching for proof that would convince them. The establishment didn't just reject his theory. They mocked him personally, destroyed his reputation, and drove him to a frozen death trying to prove himself. When GPS satellites finally measured the movement in real time, Wegener had been dead for decades. Vindication means nothing to the dead. From a man who saw continents move, we turn to a man who saw atoms themselves. Invisible particles no one believed existed. His vision of reality drove him to despair. Ludwig Boltzmann, September 5th, 1906. A 62-year-old physicist hangs himself in an Italian hotel room while his wife and daughter swim in the sea below. His name is Ludwig Boltzmann. For 2 decades, he's defended the atomic theory of matter against philosophers and physicists who insist atoms don't exist. He's correct. Matter is made of invisible particles. Energy is quantized. Entropy governs the universe. But he'll never know. 3 years after his suicide, Jean Perrin's experiments will prove atoms are real. But Boltzmann won't be there to see it. Ludwig Boltzmann was born in 1844 in Vienna. He was an Austrian physicist who developed statistical mechanics and thermodynamics. He proposed that heat and energy aren't continuous, but emerge from the motion of countless invisible atoms. His work established the second law of thermodynamics on an atomic foundation. Entropy increases because molecular collisions tend toward disorder. In 1877, Boltzmann published a paper with an unwieldy title, On the Relationship Between the Second Law of Thermodynamics and Probability Calculations Regarding the Laws of Thermal Equilibrium. In it, he introduced the concept of entropy as statistical probability. S equals K log W. S is entropy. K is the Boltzmann constant. W is the number of microstates. He showed temperature is a measure of average kinetic energy of atoms. Heat is atomic motion. He proposed an atomic explanation for gas behavior. Pressure from molecular collisions. Temperature from molecular speeds. Ernst Mach, an influential philosopher-physicist, attacked Boltzmann's atomism starting in the 1880s. He called atoms metaphysical fantasies. Wilhelm Ostwald, a Nobel Prize-winning chemist, led the energeticist movement rejecting atoms in favor of continuous energy fields. At an 1895 scientific conference in Lübeck, Boltzmann defended atomism against Mach and Ostwald. He was intellectually isolated, standing alone against the establishment. Boltzmann suffered recurrent depression throughout his life. The professional attacks worsened it. In 1900, Max Planck introduced quantum theory, showing energy is quantized. Boltzmann's statistical ideas were being vindicated, but he saw it as rejection of his complete framework. In 1903, he wrote to a friend, "I am conscious of being only an individual struggling weakly against the stream of time." By 1906, his eyesight was failing. His depression was severe. He could no longer continue research. On September 5th, 1906, he hanged himself in a hotel room in Duino near Trieste. His tombstone bears his equation. S equals K log W. In 1905, Einstein had published a paper on Brownian motion showing random molecular collisions, implying atoms exist. In 1908, Jean Perrin experimentally confirmed Einstein's predictions, measuring Avogadro's number. In 1909, Ostwald publicly renounced anti-atomism, admitting atoms were real. Boltzmann had been dead 3 years. The Boltzmann constant became a fundamental constant of nature, appearing in quantum mechanics, information theory, cosmology. His statistical mechanics became the foundation of quantum statistical physics. Boltzmann's suicide was the result of clinical depression, scholars say, deteriorating eyesight, and personal struggles, not solely professional rejection. Scientists who rejected atomism demanded empirical evidence. Until atoms could be observed, skepticism was scientifically justified. Boltzmann was vindicated posthumously, but his opponents were practicing good science by requiring proof. His death was a personal tragedy unrelated to professional disputes. But Boltzmann didn't just face skepticism. He faced organized intellectual assault. Mach and Ostwald didn't simply say, "Show me atoms." They declared atomism philosophically invalid, claimed his entire framework was metaphysical nonsense. They held institutional power, controlled journals, he influenced hiring. Boltzmann wrote to friends about being isolated, ignored, intellectually crushed. His 1903 letter shows a man whose spirit was broken by rejection. When someone dies by suicide after decades of defending ideas later proven true, calling it unrelated to professional disputes is denial. They didn't just reject his science, they broke him. And 3 years later, when they finally admitted he was right, he wasn't there to hear it. From physics to biology, from a man crushed by philosophy to a woman erased by sexism. Her photograph revealed the structure of life itself. The men who stole it won the Nobel Prize. Rosalind Franklin, April 25, 1953. In a Cambridge lab, James Watson and Francis Crick published the structure of DNA, a double helix. They win fame, knighthoods, and a Nobel Prize. On the same day, in London, a woman named Rosalind Franklin reads their paper. She recognizes data from her own research, data shown to Watson without her permission by her colleague Maurice Wilkins. Her X-ray photograph, Photo 51, revealed the helix. She took the picture. They took the credit. 5 years later, she'll die of ovarian cancer at age 37, never knowing she was robbed. Rosalind Franklin was born in 1920 in London. She was a British chemist and X-ray crystallographer. In 1951, she joined King's College London to study DNA structure using X-ray crystallography. In May 1952, she captured Photo 51, the clearest image of DNA structure ever obtained. The photo clearly showed an X-shaped diffraction pattern indicating helical structure. Her notebooks from 1952 to 1953 contain precise calculations of helix parameters: 10 base pairs per turn, 34 angstroms per repeat. On January 30th, 1953, Maurice Wilkins, Franklin's colleague at King's College, showed Photo 51 to James Watson without Franklin's knowledge or permission. Watson later wrote in his 1968 memoir, The Double Helix, that the instant I saw the picture, my mouth fell open and my pulse began to race. Wilkins also shared Franklin's unpublished data report with Watson and Crick. Using Franklin's data, Watson and Crick built their DNA model in March 1953. On April 25, 1953, Watson and Crick published a structure for deoxyribose nucleic acid in Nature. The same issue contained Franklin's paper, Molecular Configuration in Sodium Thymonucleate, confirming helical structure. Her paper was buried as supporting evidence. Watson and Crick's paper cited Franklin only in passing, saying they were stimulated by knowledge of her work. They didn't mention that Wilkins had shown them her unpublished photograph without permission. Franklin left King's College in 1953 and moved to Birkbeck College, where she studied tobacco mosaic virus. In 1956, she was diagnosed with ovarian cancer, likely caused by radiation exposure from years of X-ray work. She continued publishing research through 1957 despite her illness. She died April 16, 1958, age 37. In 1962, Watson, Crick, and Wilkins were awarded the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine for the DNA structure discovery. Nobel Prize rules prohibit posthumous awards. Franklin couldn't be honored. Watson's 1968 memoir, The Double Helix, portrayed Franklin as difficult, competitive, and unscientific. Historians now call this characterization sexist and inaccurate. Anne Sayre's 1975 biography, Rosalind Franklin and DNA, revealed the extent of sexism and credit theft. Brenda Maddox's 2002 biography, Rosalind Franklin, The Dark Lady of DN, documented systematic marginalization. A 2023 analysis of Franklin's notebooks showed she was close to solving DNA structure herself, possibly within weeks of Watson and Crick. Watson and Crick's model integrated data from multiple sources, scholars say. Franklin's X-rays, Chargaff's base pairing rules, Pauling's helix ideas. They deserve credit for model-building insight. Wilkins sharing Franklin's data was inappropriate, but not uncommon in collaborative scientific culture. Franklin's early death was tragic, but Nobel rules are clear. Only living recipients. Sexism existed in 1950s science, but Franklin's contributions are now recognized. Her omission from the Nobel was circumstantial, not malicious suppression. But collaborative scientific culture doesn't mean stealing unpublished data without permission. Wilkins wasn't Franklin's collaborator. He was her colleague who resented her presence at King's College. Watson wrote that he initially dismissed her because she was a woman who didn't emphasize her feminine qualities. The Nobel Committee could have waited to give the prize until Franklin's contributions were clear. They didn't. And Watson's 1968 portrayal of her wasn't just sexist. It was character assassination designed to justify the theft. They didn't just take credit. They destroyed her reputation posthumously to cover their tracks. By the time the truth emerged in the 1970s, most people had already accepted the Watson-Crick-Wilkins narrative. The damage was done. Franklin was erased. From a woman erased by sexism to a man driven mad by mathematics. Both saw truths that society couldn't accept, one stolen by colleagues, the other locked away by institutions. Georg Cantor, December 1899. Georg Cantor sits in a psychiatric hospital, committed for the third time. His crime? Proving that infinity has different sizes. Some infinities are larger than others. There are as many points on a line as in a cube. The real numbers can't be counted, even though there are infinitely many integers that can be. These ideas, now fundamental to mathematics, were called heresy. His colleagues said he was insane long before he was. Mathematics broke him. Or did his colleagues break him first? Georg Cantor was born in 1845 in St. Petersburg. He was a German mathematician who founded set theory and invented transfinite numbers, the mathematics of different-sized infinities. In the 1870s through 1890s, he proved there are infinitely many levels of infinity, each larger than the last. This contradicted 2,000 years of philosophy declaring infinity a single concept. It violated mathematical orthodoxy about the nature of number. In 1874, Cantor published a paper proving real numbers are uncountable, more numerous than integers, despite both being infinite. He used a diagonal argument. Given any list of real numbers, one can construct a real number not on the list. This proves reals can't be listed like integers. In 1878, he proved a shocking result. The same number of points exist on a line segment as in a square, cube, or any dimension. He wrote to a colleague, "I see it, but I don't believe it." Cantor introduced the concept of cardinality. Infinite sets have sizes called Aleph numbers, forming a hierarchy. Aleph 0 for integers, Aleph 1 for reals, Aleph 2, and so on, infinitely. Leopold Kronecker, Cantor's former professor, led opposition calling transfinite numbers mathematical madness. Kronecker blocked Cantor's papers from publication and prevented his promotion at the University of Berlin. Henri Poincaré called Cantor's set theory a disease from which mathematics would have to recover. Cantor suffered his first mental breakdown in May 1884. He was 38 years old. He was hospitalized for depression and insomnia. He corresponded with Gösta Mittag Leffler, who defended his work, but attacks continued. In 1899, Cantor was hospitalized a second time after a dispute with mathematician Arthur Schoenflies. In 1904, he was hospitalized a third time during the International Congress of Mathematicians. He spent his remaining years moving between sanity and hospital commitments. In December 1915, Cantor entered a psychiatric hospital in Halle for the final time. He died January 6, 1918, in the hospital from malnutrition during World War I shortages. He was 72 years old. His tombstone bears no equation, just his name and dates. In 1900, David Hilbert defended Cantor, saying, "No one shall expel us from the paradise that Cantor has created." In 1908, Ernst Zermelo formalized set theory with axioms, providing rigorous foundations. In 1931, Kurt Gödel proved Cantor's continuum hypothesis undecidable, a vindication of its depth. Set theory became the foundation of modern mathematics. Topology, analysis, algebra, logic all rest on Cantorian sets. Aleph notation, ordinal and cardinal numbers, the diagonal argument, these are now standard undergraduate mathematics. So Cantor suffered from bipolar disorder or severe depression with psychotic features, scholars say. Mental illness unrelated to professional disputes. Kronecker and others criticized his work, but that's normal academic debate. Mathematics can't drive someone insane. Mental illness has neurochemical causes. His institutionalizations were medical necessities, not persecution. His work was eventually accepted, showing science self-corrects. Tragic that he died before full vindication, but his mental health struggles weren't caused by colleagues. But Cantor's first breakdown came immediately after Kronecker blocked publication of his work and sabotaged his Berlin position. His subsequent breakdowns correlated with professional attacks, not random psychiatric episodes. He wrote letters describing despair at rejection, isolation from the mathematical community, the sense that his life's work was being destroyed. When someone develops mental illness under sustained institutional assault, separating real mental illness from persecution-induced illness is artificial. The attacks were real. The damage was real. Saying he just happened to be mentally ill while being professionally destroyed is gaslighting. They called him insane for seeing infinities. Then, they made him insane by crushing him. The difference matters. From mathematical madness in Germany to electrical genius in America. From a man who counted infinities to a man who harnessed lightning and died forgotten in a hotel room. Nikola Tesla. January 7th, 1943. A maid enters room 3327 of the Hotel New Yorker and finds an 86-year-old man dead in his bed, alone. Nikola Tesla, the man who invented alternating current, wireless transmission, radio control, and fluorescent lighting, dies penniless. The FBI immediately seizes his papers. The U.S. government classifies his research. He held 300 patents. He powered the modern world. But Thomas Edison, the man who tried to destroy him, is remembered as the genius. Tesla died feeding pigeons in the park. Nikola Tesla was born in 1856 in Smiljan, Austria-Hungary, now Croatia. He was a Serbian-American inventor and electrical engineer. In 1884, he arrived in America and briefly worked for Edison. Edison promised Tesla $50,000 to improve DC generators. Tesla succeeded, and Edison refused to pay, calling it American humor. That betrayal defined their relationship. In 1887, Tesla invented the AC induction motor, the foundation of industrial electric power. In 1888, George Westinghouse bought Tesla's AC patents for $60,000, plus royalties. In 1893, Tesla's AC system powered the world's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, proving AC's superiority over Edison's DC. In 1895, Tesla designed the hydroelectric power plant at Niagara Falls, the first major AC power station. The war of currents was over. Tesla won technically. Edison won financially. Edison launched a propaganda campaign, claiming AC was dangerous. He publicly electrocuted animals, including the elephant Topsy in 1903, using Tesla's AC system to associate it with death. Edison invented the electric chair using AC to link Tesla's technology with execution. It was character assassination disguised as public safety. In 1898, Tesla demonstrated a radio-controlled boat at Madison Square Garden, the first wireless remote control. In 1899, at Colorado Springs, he conducted experiments transmitting wireless energy and producing artificial lightning up to 135 feet long. In 1901, he began building Wardenclyffe Tower on Long Island, a wireless power transmission station intended to transmit electricity globally without wires. In 1906, funding collapsed after J.P. Morgan withdrew support, possibly pressured by Edison interests. Wardenclyffe Tower was never completed. It was partially demolished in 1917. In 1915, Reuters reported Tesla and Edison were nominated for the Nobel Prize in Physics. Neither received it, reportedly because they refused to share. In 1917, Tesla was awarded the Edison Medal from IEEE. Bitter irony, a medal named after his enemy. By the 1920s and 30s, Tesla lived in a series of New York hotels, increasingly reclusive. He claimed invention of a death ray, a particle beam weapon, in the 1930s. The U.S. military showed no interest. By the 1940s, he subsisted on hotel room credit and a small pension from Yugoslavia. He developed obsessive-compulsive behaviors. Fixation on the number 3. Fear of germs. Feeding pigeons daily in the park. On January 7th, 1943, so he was found dead of coronary thrombosis in the Hotel New Yorker, age 86. The FBI's alien property custodian seized 2 truckloads of Tesla's papers within hours. The government declared papers reviewed and nothing of value, but kept them classified until the 1950s. Most papers were released in the 1960s through 80s. Some remained classified or missing. In 1960, the International System of Units named the magnetic flux density unit the Tesla. The modern AC electrical grid is based entirely on Tesla's patents. Radio technology was credited to Marconi until a 1943 U.S. Supreme Court ruling recognized Tesla's prior patents. The Wardenclyffe site became a Superfund cleanup site. The Tesla Science Center was established there in 2013. The total estimated value of Tesla's inventions to the modern economy runs into trillions of dollars. Tesla died with debts. Edison died worth $12 million, equivalent to $200 million today. Tesla was a brilliant inventor, but a poor businessman, scholars say. He made bad financial decisions, trusted wrong investors, refused to compromise on impractical projects. Wireless power transmission wasn't economically viable. Edison's DC versus AC rivalry was typical business competition, not personal vendetta. Tesla's later life decline resulted from his own choices, mental health issues, and obsessive personality. The FBI seized papers as a routine wartime security measure. He's now properly recognized in history. His obscurity was temporary, not persecution. But poor businessman doesn't explain why J.P. Morgan suddenly withdrew funding from Wardenclyffe in 1906. Tesla was building wireless power transmission, free electricity for everyone. Morgan controlled copper mining, copper wires for electrical grids. He had financial motive to kill the project. Edison didn't just compete. He ran a propaganda campaign depicting Tesla's AC as a murder tool. The electric chair, animal electrocutions. It was systematic. Tesla died alone feeding pigeons, while Edison was celebrated as the inventor of the modern world. The FBI seizing his papers immediately, before even family was notified, suggests something valuable was in there. And why are some papers still classified 80 years later? What's in those files that the government doesn't want known? The question isn't just why he died poor. It's why his most revolutionary work vanished into vaults and has never fully emerged. From electrical engineering to earth science, from man-made lightning to floods that carved continents, from Tesla ignored in the 1940s to Bretz mocked in the 1920s. J. Harlen Bretz. You're standing in eastern Washington, staring at a landscape that shouldn't exist. Canyons 900 feet deep carved into basalt. massive potholes drilled by vanished waterfalls, gigantic ripple marks, ripples as big as houses. Every instinct says this was carved by water, but there hasn't been enough water here for thousands of years. In 1923, a geologist named J. Harlen Bretz proposes the impossible: a catastrophic megaflood, releasing more water than all Earth's rivers combined, drowned this landscape in days. And his colleagues laugh. They call him a heretic. It will take 40 years to prove he's right. J. Harlen Bretz was born in 1882 in Michigan. He was an American geologist who studied the channeled scablands of eastern Washington. In the 1920s, he proposed that this bizarre landscape, deep canyons, giant potholes, massive gravel bars, was carved not by slow erosion over millions of years, but by a single catastrophic flood at the end of the last ice age, approximately 15,000 years ago. In 1923, Bretz published The Channeled Scablands of the Columbia Plateau, describing erosional features requiring enormous water volumes. He documented dry cataracts, ancient waterfall sites, larger than Niagara Falls with no current water source. He identified giant current ripples, seabed forms 30 feet high with 300-foot wavelengths. These required water depths of 400 plus feet, moving 50 plus miles per hour. He calculated erosion features required discharge of 10 cubic miles of water per hour, equivalent to all rivers on Earth combined. He proposed Lake Missoula, an ice-dammed glacial lake in Montana, broke catastrophically, releasing the flood within days. On January 12, 1927, the Geological Society of Washington, D.C., held a special meeting to refute Bretz's hypothesis. Dozens of geologists lined up to attack, calling his ideas preposterous, unscientific, geological catastrophism. W.C. Alden stated Bretz's theory conflicted with fundamental principles of geology. Critics argued only slow, gradual processes, uniformitarianism, could shape landscapes. War catastrophism was outdated 19th century thinking. Bretz had no mechanism for the flood. He didn't understand ice dam burst physics. The attack was personal. It was designed to humiliate him publicly. He was 45 years old. Bretz continued solo fieldwork for decades, mapping scabland features, while the geology establishment ignored him. In 1940, geologist Joseph Pardee of the USGS privately found evidence of Lake Missoula's existence and catastrophic drainage. He didn't publish. He waited 16 years. In 1956, Pardee finally published evidence confirming Lake Missoula ice dam breakup. In 1965, additional research confirmed not one, but approximately 40 Missoula floods over 2,000 years during the last ice age. In 1969, age 87, T. Bretz attended a Geological Society of America meeting where his megaflood hypothesis was formally accepted. He was given a standing ovation. He received the Penrose Medal, the GSA's highest honor, in 1979, age 96. He died in 1981, age 98. Modern calculations show the Missoula floods discharged up to 17 cubic miles per hour. Peak flow 10 times the Amazon River. They carved the scablands in days to weeks. Similar megaflood landscapes have now been identified globally. Siberian Altai, English Channel Formation. Uniformitarianism has been modified to accept occasional catastrophic events in the geological record. Geologists rejected Bretz's hypothesis because he lacked mechanism, and evidence seemed inadequate, scholars say. Uniformitarianism had successfully defeated 19th century catastrophism, religious flood myths, so skepticism of sudden catastrophic processes was scientifically justified. When Pardee provided the ice dam mechanism and additional evidence emerged, Bretz was vindicated. Science worked correctly. Initial skepticism followed by acceptance when evidence accumulated. He lived to see recognition. His career wasn't truly destroyed, but Bretz presented mountains of physical evidence. The canyons, the ripples, The gravel bars. He calculated water volumes precisely. His data was sound. Geologists rejected him not because evidence was weak, but because catastrophism violated their philosophical worldview. They needed uniformitarianism to be universal law. Admitting even one catastrophic event threatened the paradigm they'd built careers on. That's dogma, not science. And Bretz didn't just face skepticism, he faced organized humiliation. The 1927 trial was designed to publicly shame him. He was 45 years old. It took 42 years to vindicate him. He received his highest honor at age 96, 53 years after proposing the idea. That's a destroyed career, even if he lived to see the ending. Most scientists are dead by 96. Bretz was lucky. Or maybe he was just too stubborn to die before they admitted he was right. From a man vindicated at 96, we end with a woman ostracized at 50 and vindicated at 81. From floods that carved landscapes to genes that jump and rewrite themselves. Barbara McClintock. The year is 1951. A 49-year-old geneticist named Barbara McClintock presents her research at the Cold Spring Harbor Symposium. She's discovered that genes can move, literally jump from one location to another in the genome, rewriting themselves across generations. She shows corn kernels with color patterns that prove her transposon theory. The audience sits in hostile silence. Afterward, colleagues tell her she's wrong, confused, or delusional. She stops publishing. For 30 years, she works alone. Then, molecular biology confirms she's right. She wins the Nobel Prize in 1983, age 81. But those 30 years in exile, those are gone forever. Barbara McClintock was born in 1902 in Hartford, Connecticut. She was an American geneticist specializing in maize, corn, cytogenetics. Through the 1940s, studying color patterns in corn kernels, she discovered jumping genes, transposable genetic elements that could move within the genome. This contradicted central dogma that genes occupied fixed chromosomal locations. In the 1940s, McClintock studied maize chromosomes using microscopy and breeding experiments. She observed strange kernel color patterns, patches of purple on yellow background, appearing unpredictably across generations. In 1948, she identified dissociation, DS, and activator, AC, elements that caused chromosomal breaks and kernel pigmentation changes. She realized DS and AC could move to different chromosomal locations between generations. She termed these controlling elements, now called transposons, or jumping genes. In 1951, she presented findings at the Cold Spring Harbor Symposium on quantitative biology. The audience reaction was confused silence, skepticism, dismissal. One colleague told her, "I didn't understand one word," she said, "and I don't think anybody else did either." Critics claimed kernel color patterns were environmental effects, not genetic rearrangement. Central dogma, formulated by Francis Crick in 1958, stated genetic information flows DNA to RNA to protein in one direction, and assumed static genome. McClintock's mobile elements contradicted genome stability assumptions. By the late 1950s, McClintock largely stopped publishing. Few colleagues engaged with her work. She continued solo research at Cold Spring Harbor, published sparingly, avoided conferences. She felt marginalized as a woman in a male-dominated field. She was known as intense, difficult to understand, the same language used to dismiss Rosalind Franklin. In the 1960s and 70s, molecular biology revolutionized. DNA sequencing, restriction enzymes, cloning were developed, but McClintock's work remained ignored. In 1969, bacterial transposons were discovered independently by James Shapiro and others. This vindicated McClintock's concept, but she wasn't credited or invited to conferences. In the 1970s, transposable elements were found in Drosophila, fruit flies, by Japanese geneticists. By the late 1970s, molecular evidence confirmed transposons exist across all life forms. In 1983, McClintock was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine for her discovery of mobile genetic elements. She was the sole recipient, no shared prize. At age 81, she became the oldest woman Nobel laureate at the time. Her Nobel lecture was titled "The Significance of Responses of the Genome to Challenge." Modern genetics shows transposons constitute 45% of the human genome. McClintock's so-called junk DNA is regulatory machinery. Transposons drive evolution, immune system function, VDJ recombination, and genomic diversity. They're used in genetic engineering, Sleeping Beauty transposon system for gene therapy. McClintock's work was ahead of available technology, scholars say. Without molecular tools to directly observe DNA transposition, her evidence, kernel color patterns, seemed ambiguous. Geneticists didn't reject her maliciously. They couldn't confirm her claims with 1950s methods. When molecular biology caught up in the 1970s, her ideas were validated. She won a Nobel Prize, showing science eventually recognizes truth. Her 30-year isolation was unfortunate, but resulted from technological limitations, not discrimination. But McClintock presented rigorous genetic analysis, breeding experiments, chromosomal maps, multi-generational tracking. Her evidence was as strong as Mendel's pea plants, which established genetics. The difference? She was a woman presenting ideas that complicated the simple model male geneticists preferred. Colleagues described her as difficult to understand, the same language used to dismiss Franklin. She wasn't difficult to understand. She was threatening, and when the field ignored her, she stopped trying. Those 30 years weren't unfortunate technological delay. She was professionally ostracized. The Nobel came too late to restore what was taken. 3 decades of collaborative science, recognition during her productive years, the community she deserved. By the time transposons were discovered in bacteria in 1969, male scientists received credit and conference invitations. McClintock, who described the mechanism 18 years earlier, wasn't invited. The Nobel in 1983 was a consolation prize, acknowledgement that came after a generation of exclusion. History frames it as triumph, but triumph would have been recognition in 1951, collaboration in the 1960s, a transformed career trajectory. What she got was exile followed by belated apology. Look at the pattern. 10 scientists across 3 millennia and 6 continents. 10 people who saw truth that didn't exist yet in human understanding. Germs before microscopes, heliocentrism before telescopes, atoms before particle physics, continents moving before plate tectonics, DNA structure before molecular biology, infinity before modern mathematics, transposons before genetic engineering. They weren't just ahead of their time. They were right in ways that couldn't be proven with available tools.